To Yatsiba Lab today for one of our public lectures as part of the Winter School for 2026, which is moving around the theme of liminalities. If anybody doesn't know me, my name is Patricia Hayes, and I'm Saatchi Chair of Visual History and Theory here at CHR, and I will be chairing this event this evening. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Marcos Martins, who is a Digital Curatorial Fellow since 2025, and again this year with the New Archival Visions program. And before I introduce Marcos himself, I'd like to say a few things about this program, which the CHR has been incubating on behalf of the University of the Western Cape. So basically, there were sectors in the university who wished to act on their responsibilities as joint custodians of the Maibuye archives, which is one of South Africa's most important archives of the anti-apartheid struggle. And they wanted to give credence to the claim to be a research university by one, addressing conditions for preserving and expanding historic and multimedia collections, and two, by promoting research, teaching, and curating in these archives. So a melon seed grant to prepare a white paper, assessment, and then funding for this New Archival Visions program from the Department of Higher Education and Training followed. And I'm mentioning all this because last week, we also had a dedicated workshop that was talking about the universities and where they are headed. Now, in this NAV program, we call it NAV, New Archival Visions. It has an archivist, Geraldine Frieslar, a program director, Candice Janssen, and a very substantive fellowship who are sprinkled across the panels of Winter School. In the program, we've taken the route not of highlighting needs and the parlous state of our under-resourced archives, but of going straight to activation. So supporting fellows to go in, work with archivists, and bring parts of collections to life, whether they be documentary text, sound, video, photographic. And we don't just mean using the archives and presenting projects because there might be gaps. We're asking everybody to engage in a much more transformative shift, one that is not about looking at the history or the images from a distant and comfortable stance, where we think we know what the archive is about, and go in and just take things out to confirm what we already think. We rather take the idea of reading practices that Moritz has outlined, where you abandon yourself to the possibility that the text or hear the image or sound recording is going to surprise you. We want our activation to bring about a more complex positionality, where, as Tina Kampt puts it in her book, A Black Gaze, we shift the optics of looking at to a politics of looking with, through, and alongside another. And this requires effort and exertion. And here, as Marcos will highlight, an immersivity that also engages multiple senses, not just looking. The Congolese art historian Sandrine Collard, who gave a keynote lecture here last year, she outlines a scenario where resource poverty has left custodial institutions in Africa ineffective in terms of preservation and access, while post-colonial, and in our case, post-apartheid discourse may still trumpet a false claim to hold core knowledge about the national narrative. And Collard deploys a notion of an archive interspace which might be interesting to think about in terms of liminalities. An archive interspace that's marked by misadventure and decline. And her interpretation here is that the formal institution itself, the archive, and by association, colonial, or here apartheid-era modernity, are being left to die. But in contrast to this sobering assessment, the mobility of archival objects such as photographs and the reinvention of their meanings are secured by claims made by citizens who reposition and reinterpret them. That is us, and that is activation. Collard also works with the concept of the archival turntable, where you set things off into a new spin. You remix. And this is where Marcos comes in with facts and fabulations. So, Associate Professor Marcos Martins has joined us from the Escola Superior de Diseño Industrial. Sorry, it's not a Brazilian accent. That's the School of Advanced Industrial Design in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He completed his doctorate in communications at the Federal University of Brazil and a postdoctoral fellowship at Princeton as well. He's co-authored the book. The title is Everyday Acts of Design, Learning in a Time of Emergency, with Zoe Anastasakis. And Marcos has engaged in much critical work on social media interfaces. His research brings design into dialogue with art, film, philosophy, psychoanalysis, education, and let us not forget, opera. His presence and the multifaceted intelligence he brings have enlivened both the archive project and the CHR, and we look forward immensely to his lecture. Thank you, Mart.
I'm very honored to be here, and thanks to the New Archival Visions program for having made this project possible. The exhibition, Facts and Fabulations, is the outcome of a project that began with a call for a digital curatorial fellowship from NAV program, as Patricia already indicated. The call invited projects that would engage with the archival collections of the Robben Island Mayabui archives, housed at UWC. It also sought proposals that would make the archive more accessible, particularly to younger generations. Feeling completely compelled to apply, I nevertheless found it difficult to figure out how I could propose a project based on a collection that I barely knew. I had never been to the Mayabui archives and knew little about their history or institutional context. It was by acknowledging this position that the idea first emerged to approach a repository of photographs and historical documents, not through a predefined research theme, but through the experience of a first unprepared encounter with images. In this way, my proposal would, from the beginning, foreground imagination before knowledge, or rather, imagination as constitutive of knowledge. Thinking about the call's emphasis on youth, I took my own position as a newcomer as a starting point for engaging UWC students, imagining that some of them too might be encountering the Mayabui archives and parts of its collections for the first time. In my proposal, I included workshops with students to produce content for this exhibition. In this way, young people would take part as collaborators rather than simply as the target audience. Indeed, the participants became very engaged with the project. One of them, Katlego Tisetso, after offering to help voluntarily, turned out to work as an assistant curator. Others, which I will also name, Keletso Koma, Haley Lee Scott, Shlumelo Situngu, Leila Arenze, and Lutu Mlakomo, extended their participation as gallery guides. All of them are present here today. I would like now to make a brief description of the project stages, especially because I know some people from the CH are already familiar with this process, but a lot of people here in the winter scope are not. So let me get this. First, I spent several months on the ground floor of Mayabui archive, browsing photographs and selecting a small number that for one reason or another caught my attention. Guided by these initial encounters, I then moved upstairs to the historical papers collection where I searched for information about the events related to those few images. I examined and photographed hundreds of newspaper clippings, documents, and other archival material in an effort to contextualize those images and to learn about the events they related to. The second phase, the workshop, I conducted these four full-day workshops with undergraduates and postgraduate students at UWC. I wanted that mix. I wanted necessarily to have undergraduates and graduates together and not only postgraduate students. During these workshops, participants were first invited to fabulate about the selected images without being given any additional information. These conversations were recorded and can be heard in this exhibition. The students were then given access to the archival material I had gathered, followed by a discussion in which they could compare their initial interpretations with the historical records. Finally, they experimented with writing prompts to generate AI image based on an audio recording from the Mayabui collections, which also takes part in the exhibition. This image will not be addressed today in my talk, but I'm happy to talk about it afterwards if somebody is interested. The third stage of the project is the exhibition Facts and Fabulations on view at the Yatsiba Lab Gallery until the end of this month. The same movement from not knowing into knowing a little more is reenacted in this exhibition. Only 7 images are displayed on the walls with no additional information. This creates a space for visitors to fabulate before gaining access to items from the Mayabui archives through augmented reality installations. Edited recordings of the students' fabulations, as I said, can also be heard. The primary aim of this exhibition was not to illustrate abstract concepts, but to create an experience of oscillation between these categories, facts and fabulations, which are, of course, idealized, but become intertwined and understood as a continuous movement. I had, however, arrived at working conceptualizations for both terms. Fabulations indicate our repertoire, our memories, where we come from. Facts are not taken as fixed narratives, but the very movement towards facts, themselves never reachable. Now that the project has reached its conclusion, I want to explore how these two definitions have evolved through some of the theoretical questions it has generated. In the following notes, I bring together authors I have long engaged with and others I encountered during the course of this project. These references did not provide a conceptual framework for the project, but emerged from it. First came the research, the workshops, and the exhibition, all of these quote-unquote facts, if you will. The following reflections do not aspire to form a fully coherent whole, but as notes are organized around 4 themes: technology, time, truth, and togetherness. So I'm going to move forward to the first one. To situate the technological dimension of this exhibition, I would like to summarize the typical interaction it proposes. Beside each image, 2 QR codes that beside each image are 2 QR codes that visitors can scan. The one on the right provides access to approximately 3 minutes of edited recordings of the students' fabulations, while the other one on the left opens to the augmented reality installations. As a suggested sequence, visitors are invited to first encounter the images, then to listen to the students' fabulations, and finally to explore the augmented reality. I'm going to talk a little bit about this sequence in a while. The choice to use augmented reality technology was not simply motivated by a desire to experiment with alternative, cool ways of presenting archival material. It was made primarily because it allowed me to keep the information content hidden until activated. The combination between the physical presence of the images and the hidden virtual information creates the conditions for the fabulatory exercise. It highlights the transition between not knowing and knowing that had structured the two previous stages of the project. I had conceptualized facts not as fixed entities, but as a movement toward them. Accordingly, I wanted to create an experience in which knowledge emerged through actual physical movement. To accomplish this, I needed to think carefully about how visitors would move their bodies through the gallery space. This required considerable time and effort to test and refine the system. To develop the AR installations, I used the software JigSpace. As soon as I had a rough prototype, I began usability testing, a common practice in interaction design. I conducted numerous tests of the sequence of actions required to view the AR content on my iPhone, first testing the prototype myself and then observing others as they used it. In an AR experience, it requires faith in technology. In an AR experience created with JigSpace, virtual objects are positioned relative to an anchor established by tapping a crosshair on your phone's screen while aiming at a horizontal surface such as a table or a floor, or the floor. I therefore needed to determine the exact position visitors would occupy and the precise point at which they should tap for the system to work. This led me to place a cross on the floor to indicate where the crosshair on the screen should be aligned and tapped. These are all instructions for you who will try the exhibition in a while, I hope. So you better pay attention to that, because I'm already teaching how to use it. This led me then to place these crosses on the floor that should be aligned and tapped, as well as the line marking where the viewers should stand. This seemed to work very well. Regarding the distribution of the elements, I initially adopted a rectangular layout that simply mimicked the arrangement of conventional gallery space. This is on the white one on the left. The tests led me to change the initial disposition to an elliptical one. I felt this would better follow the natural rotation of the viewer's body and encourage continuous movement. The usability test showed me that people tended to remain stationary in front of the first virtual elements rather than moving on to engage with all the archival material. I then had the idea to include in the very first virtual card that you see when you lift your phone, instructions like turn to your right and walk across the room, together with a sign that says, this way. Even so, most people would just not move. A technical issue aggravated this stasis. Given the software's constraints, it was impossible for users to zoom in order to enlarge images to read text more clearly. So again, the visitor needs to walk through the gallery and physically move closer to the object, to the virtual object, in order to be able to read. The marks on the floor, the elliptical arrangement, and the clear instructions helped to some extent, but the stasis was only overcome when somebody explicitly instructed people to move through the installation. This became one of the tasks of the students selected to serve as gallery guides. Through the design process and the recognition of its limitations, I realized something simple. With a cell phone in their hands, people just preferred not to move. The process also revealed how deeply naturalized the gestures of zooming, pinching, and scrolling have become. I hope the exhibition fosters the same awareness in its visitors by asking them to do something that has become increasingly challenging, to move in search of information. Looking back on the set of design decisions I made, I can define what I have created as an artificial archival reality within an augmented reality conceived as a means to returning back to ordinary reality. So the next theme is time. One of the visitors to the exhibition asked me what I hoped people would retain from it. Without hesitation, I replied that if I could choose only one aspect, it would be time. From its inception, Facts and Fabulations was conceived to offer an experience of temporality that departs from the accelerated consumption of information and images characteristic of contemporary technologies and their associated ergonomics. I would like to suggest that the exhibition intervenes in this temporal regime by interrupting the forms of attention and bodily engagement demanded by the use of mobile phones. Browsing on the screen of a cell phone demands an immediate coupling between our eyes and our fingers, joining the tactile and the visual into a single mechanical arrangement. This composite is at the service of the instant provision of information and other forms of content. We might understand the cell phone as a contemporary dispositif through which disciplinary techniques continue to operate, albeit in forms quite different from those Michel Foucault identified as emerging from the 17th century onward. As he famously argued, discipline produced docile bodies, bodies that operate, quote, with the techniques, the speed, and the efficiency that one determines, unquote. Today, however, discipline no longer relies primarily on explicit protocols governing bodily movements. Following Mauricio Lazzarato and Antonio Negri, we might understand this as a shift from physical toward the cognitive and immaterial. Yet, contemporary docile bodies are still produced, less through coercion than through the promise of an endless supply of content capable of satisfying every need. Today's docility could be measured by the amount of time one spends subjected to the privilege granted to the fingertips and the eyes over the rest of the body, which remains alienated. To guarantee instant gratification, there can be no delay, no distraction, no distance between demand and delivery. It is precisely by introducing such a delay, by imposing a distance between the contemplation of an image and its quote-unquote understanding, that this exhibition seeks to produce a different temporal experience. In doing so, it interferes with the cognitive automatisms engendered by contemporary technological habits. That's right. It takes time to observe an image carefully and speculate about its meaning in the absence of an authoritative explanation. Listening to 3 minutes of recorded fabulations while looking at the image further slows the pace. The student's remarks draw attention to details that might otherwise go unnoticed or to unexpected associations with the image. Finally, engaging with the augmented reality installations require additional time to move through a substantial body of archival material. This slower temporality is intended to produce 2 forms of in-betweenness. The first, cognitive, to place the visitor at the moving point between facts and fabulations, continually shifting closer now to one, now to the other. The second is bodily, by requiring visitors to move through the gallery in search of information. The whole body is activated in a way that the difference between the digital and the physical become noticeable and challenging. Both these forms of in-betweenness remind me of Henri Bergson's proposition that our navigation in the world continuously moves between attentive perception and memory. In other words, between moments that demand our immediate action and others when we feel more free to remember and dream. In his famous inverted cone diagram, P, this plane on the horizontal, is, he says, my actual representation of the universe. The point S indicates at all times my present, which moves forward unceasingly, while the circular base AB represents the totality of the recollections accumulated in my memory. Between these two poles, Bergson writes, there is room for 1,000 repetitions of our psychic life. We constantly contract memory toward action or dilate it toward reverie. These two extremes exist, of course, only in theory. In lived experience, they are always mixed. I think I can explain some of the propositions of facts and fabulations by adapting Bergson's diagram to our digital reality in a kind of retrospective fabulation. It is not difficult to think of the plane of action P as the screen of a cell phone, our representation of the world, not because the cell phone screen is literally flat, but just because it is this place where we perform actions. S would be that point in the present which demands our attention and urges us to act by tapping, browsing, zooming, consuming erotic content, liking, blocking, canceling. The plane of total memory, AB, might, I would suggest, be gradually impoverished as we increasingly rely on the exteriorization of memory and thought into digital repositories. Platforms such as Facebook periodically return selected memories to us, inviting us to actualize them. Likewise, AI, through the statistical recombination of digitally exteriorized memory, may contribute to a gradual weakening of the lived memory in favor of the continuous reflux of recorded traces. In facts and fabulations, by contrast, facts cannot be quickly digested as news. It is important to emphasize in this project that the items of the archival material from Maya Bui collection cannot be mistaken by facts. I say this because, of course, an exhibition with the title Facts and Fabulations, when you have one QR code to fabulations, the other QR code to facts, obviously would suggest some kind of dualism, some kind of frontier between the two. I'm just making it explicit that the facts are not what's floating in the AR environment. These fragments of archival material, they are fragments, clues, and traces that accompany the visitor's movement toward the facts. If they provide evidence, it is not so much of the facts themselves as of the discourse circulating at the time of the events, discourses that are themselves historical facts. Fabulations, on the other hand, function as a means of accessing personal memories activated by the images and the archival materials. The temporality they require stands in opposition to statistical memories instantly retrieved by AI. Instead, they seek to reconnect visitors with memories and affects emerging from lived experience outside the continuous flow of social media. Now, truth. A common question about the 7 images in the exhibition concerns the criteria for their selection. While all relate broadly to the struggle against apartheid, reflecting the origins of the Maya Bui collections, they were chosen less for their shared theme than for their capacity to invite fabulation through ambiguity, mystery, or delayed recognition. All of these qualities that I could identify in the images I selected. This criterion reflects the project's central proposition that fabulation can serve as an entry point to a journey towards truth. So if there is one single theme that pervades all subject matters presented in this exhibition, This theme is the question of our contemporary regime of truth in the terms put by Michel Foucault. This concept, which Foucault qualifies as an hypothesis, posits truth not as a fixed, metaphysical, and universal category. Truth is from this world, says Foucault. It is then a cultural function historically viable and determined under certain conditions and practices which constitute a system. Let's remember his words. Each society has its regime of truth, its general politics of truth, that is, the types of discourse which it accepts and makes function as true, the mechanisms and instances which enable one to distinguish true and false statements. Thinking back with this concept, I wish to understand truth as something under permanent construction and reconstruction, and to pose the question of what would be the possibilities of truth today. It is hard, though, to define a system that would regulate what is true or false, especially if we adhere to the relatively recent diagnosis of the post-truth era, which by its own definition would make the concept of a regime of truth anachronistic and inoperative. In The Immense Regression, Bernard Stiegler suggests that the diagnosis of post-truth stems from the disintegration of those mechanisms and instances which could allow us to envision the outlines of a regime of truth. According to Stiegler, the whole apparatus of certification that once constituted regimes of truth has literally been disintegrated by the new media. A veritative selection criteriologist gives way to pure computational logic. Algorithmic efficiency replaces truth, leaving users with a sense of magic, that is, the omnipotence of incomprehensible forces. I tend to agree with part of Stiegler's argument about the destructiveness of computational logic in relation to truth, but I am suspicious of the naturalization with which he uses time and again the term post-truth. It seems to me extremely convenient for systems of power that rely on post-truth that we are convinced that truth is no longer possible under algorithmic unintelligibility. It seems that the idea of truth cannot survive the dissemination of multiple rendings of a single event based on users' profiles, each of them guiding the delivery of a different version of true events, quote unquote. And yet here I am proposing the use of cell phones as a mean towards truth. As I said before, this exhibition explores an interference within the system by using its own devices differently. It encourages a kind of detective work, instead of the linear flow of efficient delivered information. What makes this engagement possible is the temporary suspension of computational memory in favor of the activation of personal memory through the privilege and precedence given to fabulation. Fabulation is a trendy and loaded term in contemporary artistic practice and academic debate. It has been explored by several authors, Gilles Deleuze, Donna Haraway, and Saidiya Hartman, just a few. Since the aim of this project was not to develop a comprehensive theory of fabulation, but to create an experience, I did not attempt a systematic review of the term's many incarnations. I do, however, engage with a few approaches in order to clarify the particular sense that the term acquires in this project. Saidiya Hartman's critical fabulation could potentially promise a closer link to my proposals because of the direct connection she establishes with Fabulations and the archive. There are, however, important differences which I would like to address. As is well known, Hartman conceives fabulation as a way of addressing archival omissions concerning people whose lives are often documented only through the records of violence they were victims of. Beginning from archival records, she constructs counter-narratives, quote, capable of retrieving what remains dormant, unquote. So critical fabulation, very, very reducibly, would be a method to emphasize the incommensurability between the prevailing discourses and the event by producing a counter-history at the intersection of the fictive and the historical. Facts and Fabulation is aligned with creating awareness of the distance between prevailing discourses and events. It does so primarily by presenting archival material in a non-totalizing and non-uniform way, confronting visitors with multiple and sometimes even opposing readings of a single event. Hartman's term, intersection, is also clearly applicable, since this project is centered in maintaining the tension between the fictive and the historical. However, this exhibition is not primarily politically invested in, quote, writing with and against the archive, unquote, nor it is mainly intended to tell untold stories. Rather, it aims to create an experience in which contemporary narratives can emerge around stories that are already well known, still fresh in the memories of older generations, yet less familiar to younger ones. The crucial difference in relations to Hartman's proposal is that, while her fabulations are importantly based on existing narratives and data preserved in the archives, Facts and Fabulations delays access to these narratives by first promoting an encounter with the muteness of photographs. As Susan Sontag has put it, photographs are inexhaustible invitations to deduction, speculation, and fantasy. The very muteness of what is hypothetically comprehensible in photographs is what constitutes their attraction and their provocativeness. It is precisely the encounter it is precisely because the encounter begins with this invitation to speculation that the archive meets the contemporary. I found in Toni Morrison's discussion of a symbiotic relationship between memory and fiction a closer reference to the kind of liminality this exhibition aims to offer, even though Morrison does not use the term fabulation. As is well known, her 1987 lecture, The Site of Memory, raises concerns that resonate with Hartman's later formulations. She argued that for fictionalizing omitted episodes of extreme brutality in autobiographical narratives by formerly enslaved Americans, in order to do so, she would need to rely on her own recollections, projecting her own past onto the narratives of her ancestors. Borrowing the expressions memories within from Zora Neale Hurston, she cites this remarkable line. Like the dead seeming cold rocks, I have memories within that came out of the material that went to make me. Admitting that memory alone could not fulfill her need to tell untold and unrecorded veiled stories, Morrison argues that imagination is required. What brings her reflection so close to my project is that the exercise of imagination presupposes the primacy of the image over the text. The approach that's most productive is the recollection that moves from the image to the text. What makes it fiction is the nature of the imaginative act, my reliance on the image in the addition to recollection, to yield up a kind of a truth. Of course, Morrison is not referring to images on a physical support, but rather to visual mnemonic compositions as a method of writing. Yet I think her approach can be extended to the encounter of actual photographs. During the workshops, when looking at photographs, the students' fabulations quickly revealed how imagination draws on lived experience, bringing a contemporary layer to the archival material. An airbrushed portrait of John Dubé prompt comments as, what if he was a she? Or, this image may be AI, while the COSATU headquarters were interpreted as an institution like a school, and a police officer identified as a lady, black skirt, white shirt, which is normally a South African school uniform. That person over there on the central window, that policeman. Only after the fabulations were archival documents introduced in the workshops. The students found out, for example, that John Dube was the first president of the South African Native National Congress, the predecessor of the African National Congress, the ANC, and that the building housed the headquarters of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU. Rather than correcting the initial fabulations, this new knowledge entered into dialogue with them. The question of why Dube could not have been a woman opened discussions about gender and political leadership, while the reading of the Union headquarters as a school recalls students' own experiences of police violence on university campuses. In this way, the intertwining of facts and fabulations created an empathetic bridge between past and present, inviting new understanding of archival material rather than merely confirming established historical narratives. This is also the pedagogical aspect of this project. It is perhaps through this mixture of narrative elements that one can find a political dimension to the project. It allows, welcomes, and values the prior knowledge of anyone, from the novice to the expert, who is confronted with an image and immediately starts mobilizing their memory and imagination as an entry point to history. This explicit and intentional intertwining also allows the archive to lose some of its authority. Now, the last note I want to present concerns the collective dimension of this project. From my encounters with the people who work at the Mayabui archives, to the experience of sitting with students as they freely explore their fabulations, and all the encounters in between, this project has been pervaded by collaboration. During the workshops, I could sense the students' engagement and excitement as they discussed their hypotheses and shared their findings. I also observed visitors talking to one another and with the gallery guides, commenting on the images and sharing their views about the exposed materials. I was there that day, and it was nothing like the students imagined, an annoyed journalist told me on the opening day. This looks like the place where I grew up, a student recognized in one of the photographs. I remember this so well, I heard from another visitor. On that very day, when I took this picture, a colleague took this one, now I see in this newspaper clipping, commented a photographer whose image is one of the seven hanging on the walls and who is present actually here today. These and many other comments made me realize not only how present the struggle against apartheid remains, but also how deeply actual segregation is still woven into everyday experience. People who lived through these events continue to recognize them, identify with them, and feel themselves to be participants in the ongoing construction of historical narratives. These continue to demand to be told and retold from multiple perspectives. The collective dimension of the construction of truth may indicate challenging conclusive diagnosis of post-truth non-epoch, that a wish for truth is still present today, perhaps even more in the face of the growing threat of authoritarianism and renewed forms of fascism. By insisting in such wish for truth, I do not mean that it carries a positive moral sense. I need to do what is right or to behave correctly, but rather our recognition that truth remains a condition of possibility for social life. Revisiting Nietzsche's incisive and merciless words in On Truth and Lies in a Non-Moral Sense may offer an illuminating angle from which to understand the social need for truth beyond simple choice or vocation. Deception, flattering, lying, deluding, talking behind the back, putting up a false front, living in borrowed splendor, wearing a mask, hiding behind convention, playing a role for others and for oneself is so much the rule and the law among men that there's almost nothing which is less comprehensible than how an honest and pure drive for truth could have arisen among them. But at the same time, from boredom and necessity, man wishes to exist socially and with the herd. Therefore, he needs to make peace and strives accordingly to banish from his world at least the most flagrant bellum omni contra omnes, war of each against all. Reading today such an unflattering explanation of truth, we might feel that the all-powerful edifice of truth, to use Nietzsche's image, is beginning to crack. One contemporary expression of this threatening war of each against all may lie at the core of our digital interactions in social media, based on the solitary act of browsing. The form of sociability it engenders often relies on anonymity and encourages various forms of voyeurism. In this context, expressions such as putting up a false front and playing a role for others and for oneself seem to fit all too well. It is difficult not to feel uneasy about this anachronistic bridge between a philosopher's words from more than 150 years ago and today's digital conditions. Nietzsche's critique of truth is understandable in a long historical span when it was dominant. If his critique sought to unsettle an unchallenged certainty, our present moment confronts us with the opposite problem. Today, as post-truth becomes increasingly dominant, one may ask whether we should not insist once more on truth and on the possibility of such a regime capable of making collective life possible. It is, if that possibility is to be sustained, it becomes crucial to examine technology without surrendering to its apparently inviolable opacity. One way of doing that, I suggest, is to pay close attention to the interfaces that shape everyday experience, while also imagining new arrangements for them. Facts and Fabulations is conceived as an exhibition in which familiar digital interactions are harnessed to foster a different way of accessing information within a collective setting. As a concluding note, I would like to mention something I had not planned and that became visible only after the exhibition opened. I owe this thought to an observation made by Candice Jansen about the curious situation of seeing virtual archival material on the screen alongside other people. In the gallery room, whenever there is a group of visitors, one can see them very absorbed by the content on their device's visual field. Surprisingly, they don't bump into each other. I actually remember in the opening, standing 1 meter away from a person I was chatting with, when suddenly another person passed undisturbed right between us, magnetized by their iPad's screen. The scene is a bit surreal. Nobody seems to bother. The person seeing through the screen knows she's being watched. Yet, this doesn't cause discomfort, since she is also watching others without much interest in them. This gaze, this simultaneous seeing and being seen, is very different from social media situation, which favors both voyeurism and hiding. This mutual gaze happens in a kind of silent awareness of others, who share the same curiosity and the same wish to know more. Thanks.
I was curious in your choice of choosing to display so much text through augmentation, because in my experience, you know, I've been told 90 seconds of attention span is what the audience will have. But it is a very brave thing to do, I think, in my opinion, to imagine that the audience will give that much of their attention span, you know, a 3-minute audio recording, but also so much text, which is great as a curation that it's all there in terms of facts and fabulation. So I was just wondering if you could talk a bit about your decision in a gallery where I think you quoted Susan Sontag in terms of photographs are an invitation to fantasy and speculation. But here, those photographs bring up a lot of text. So I was just curious about that creative decision for the exhibition.
I was just struck in looking at this extraordinary video at the end that you've shown us of people looking. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what you think happens to the body of the person in the space of the exhibition, because the chilling kind of silence of this, I mean, people look like zombies. They look like people who walk around in social space who could get run over by cars, you know, because they're looking at their phones. And you've told us that people have an extraordinary kind of, I don't know, fifth or sixth or seventh sense, so they're not bumping into each other. But they do really look like they're in some kind of science fiction dystopia. Everybody in their own space, staring at their screen, looking towards or walking towards knowledge or fiction or whatever it is. So, I mean, what is your experience of what happens to us as people in real space as opposed to virtual space in this extended sense that you've given us of what the space is that we inhabit?
I think in like a similar theme to the questions that have come, mine's also about the body. And I think like when you're playing with immersive medias, there's a lot of cool like virtual concepts you can start to test with these technologies. But and doing it myself as well, I'm thinking about how do we like communicate with the body in a way in which kind of invites behaviors that are not like typical or prescribed, you know. So like I think yeah, so because we're talking about puppetry a lot here, and we oh, I think I'm losing it. But when you started in the beginning and you gave people instruction on how to move, that didn't necessarily become something that people necessarily wanted to do, right? So are there routes to to speak into to bodies, to a bodily communication and I'm not saying necessarily with these technologies, although they allow us to play in that realm, right? But is there a way to speak to our behaviors, something like that?
Megan, the choice of displaying so much text and the augmentation. There were much more text in what is displayed, so there was a lot to reduce. But I guess it goes together with this wish to go in the countercurrent of contemporary dictums and prescriptions in the field of interaction design. I am aware of all those measures and how much span of attention people can digest and all that. So on one hand, I think, yes, intentionally, I am proposing something that can be challenging. And I did ask, when I was doing the training of the gallery guides, I asked, what did you think of the experience? They first tested the system before I started teaching them how to teach people. And so I said, didn't you find it boring? And then Shlumello said, yes, I did find it very boring in the end, after a while. And then I remember that Catlego answered to her, yes, but this kind of boreness, this boring aspect of it is actually part of the experience. And if you isolate just text, so much text, oh my God, I have to read all that, I don't want to even begin. This, of course, was my own feeling about the thing I had created. I said, oh, but nobody's going to want to see that. And I was quite surprised to see that people do spend a lot of time in these experiences. I was very surprised, and of course happily surprised, and this is actually why this inspired me to do all these bits of theorizations on this, because why is it that this happened? So I looked back into what I had done, and I could see that if you go and you see the image, and if you listen to the Fabulations, even if you don't listen to the entirety of it, but you're at some points you hear, look at that person over there, that puts this visitor in a situation of like gradually getting invited and being sort of involved in this kind of fabulatory, distended availability of time. So I think this has to do with the sequence that happened, that actually it was a surprise to me too. On the other hand, I think that people are not expected to see this exhibition, the whole exhibition. They just see, as any exhibition actually, you see here and there what catches your attention. You don't need to read everything. What I try to do in terms of design, I think maybe you've seen some of these. Let me see if I can go back. Because remember, this is a design exhibition. So it's this. You see, I did this myself. I highlighted in green passages of all these newspaper clippings. I went on and read them, and I said, what would a visitor potentially want to read first? What would give like a summary of the whole thing? Because if you just present the whole, the newspaper clip, it brings a lot of laziness, right? I mean, in many archival exhibitions, you have those windows, those tables with glass that you have to, go there and you see these minuscule objects and you have to go and read. You have to really love to see that if you want to learn anything. So I tried. This is kind of a pop exhibition in a way, because I did do these markings on the sacrosanct archival material. So it is like, a little bit trying to make it more accessible. So I did think of that. But yeah, that's what I have to say about that. And the muteness of the photograph is because it seems to me that you were sort of thinking, but if we are to enjoy the muteness of photograph, how come you come with all these trucks of text to us? It's going to kill the muteness, right? So I think the muteness photographs remain mute forever, because it's like constantly inviting these speculations. So the muteness, actually what she's saying, in my opinion, is that it is the promise of comprehensibility that creates the muteness. It's like our expectation that something is about to be said that puts us in this situation, but it's not saying. So I have to come and say. So I don't think the text, captions, titles, headings, anything will kill this muteness. It can actually disguise it, but not eradicate it completely. So Tamar, the body in space like zombies. As you were saying, I've thought of such a better creature. Yes, I thought of the dreamers, the flaneur, more beautiful, positive things than the Michael Jackson zombies. But I think that, first of all, something that's very interesting to think is young people, they walk with their phones all the time. For them, they're not like, I have to stop to not use my phone. They are already living like that, like living in this mixed space where the phone is actually not incompatible with action, with the body. But what I wanted to call attention is not the fact that the body needs to move, is that in this exhibition, because the body is moving, maybe there is a way of people to getting close to the awareness of how much we alienate our bodies, even if we are walking. It's not just staying in a bed, browsing, or in a chair before the computer, but actually it's this thing, this connection between the fingertips and the eyes, sort of kind of zombicizes the rest of the body in a way. So instead of dystopia, I would prefer maybe utopia. Because what you were seeing is actually zombies and these people. I read it after Candace awoke this observation in me. I thought, how wonderful, all these people, each one in their own world, living together in this space of conviviality, when they are with their cell phones, not looking at each other, not trying to cancel each other, not trying to see some nudes from people or anything. It's just like the same device, but used socially in a completely different way. But of course, I'm not saying that that is the truth of a new type of experience. None of that. It's just an experience that allows for some fabulation, that this kind of conviviality is possible if you learn, if you sort of pay attention to the usage of these machines in different ways. So this is like the awkwardness of the proposal use of the device is at service of some kind of insights that can arise from that, more than trying to say this is the new way of going, nothing like that. It's just an experience that allows for unfoldings. And Sarah, this is very interesting, what you said, the immersive medias. There was something, because I forget, of course, everything, but something you said was so interesting, was there's so many cool things that you can do, right? That you can, the sensorium can be like super spectacular and sort of inviting and sort of actually swallowing the consciousness and the body of this visitor in a way that is like, like a really a drug experience or something like that. So this is, I think, what most systems of immersion that you see all around the world in galleries, and then like versions, I saw a version of David Hockney's paintings in an immersive situation. It's all directed to forgetfulness, to ones to forget their own body and their own conscious and adhere to this kind of trance. So it's like a psychedelism, a new psychedelicism. So this is maybe realizing that I had these technical limitations, right? I had cell phones, I had to learn this jig space. I couldn't make like an immersive environment. Maybe I didn't want to, but I just thought, well, if that's what I have, let's give it a positive sign. So the lo-fi in my hi-fi of augmented reality is actually a way of putting into visibility the manual of instructions, something very obsolete. Nobody reads any manual. So when the gallery guide is actually instructing people how to use the exhibition, I'm giving awareness and conscience of this mediation of technology and not proposing something that the person doesn't have to think to click. Actually, there's a famous text in the literature of interaction design with the title is exactly that. Don't make them think. In all of our interface designs of all the social media platforms and all that, the design principle is don't make them think to click. And I want to actually give a positive sign to this thickness of trying to understand the system. So this experience that I propose in the exhibition is actually at the service of this situation when one becomes aware of their situation here and now, instead of being transported into a psychedelic trance.
I don't want to risk going into territory that might not be necessary for everyone to think about. But I mean, I really want to commend this project and recommend that it be expanded and developed further. Because for me, this is not just a project based upon and drawn upon an archive. For me, it's a deliberate, it constitutes an intervention in what has administratively been some very difficult challenges, where the archive, caught as it is between two institutions with difficulty, and inside, on the one hand, a research environment, and on the other hand, an environment of national heritage that requires certain concepts of fact and truth, and where I want to suggest that our crisis in the administration of archive is caused by the crisis of fact and truth that arises not just because of the administrative difficulties between institutions. I want to suggest that this is exactly the kind of project that should enable the university and Robben Island Museum to find a way through those difficulties.
Just to make a comment around that, the other body in the room here is the archive. So it's doing stuff to our bodies, but it's also doing something to that body. And I don't know if it's a singular body. Maybe, yes, it is the Maibuya, but it is also a body. And in that sense, I love the way that your exhibition is also through these ways that you're asking us to move, is disrupting those logics of that body. Meghna mentioned the text heaviness. I would actually move, what you're doing is moving from text to texture. We are feeling our way through these words, these imprints. Yes, they're virtual, but yeah, we're feeling our way through. We're not just reading them. So I think that's also another wonderful kind of flame that you've ignited for me around the way that you are texturizing all of this words. And I think another wonderful logic that you're disrupting is us being led by the photograph. Because we know within archival logics, the photograph comes after the document. And so I love the way we're being led by the image through all of that texture. But I think, of course, the most important disruption also that you're making around the archive is its certainty. By really staging its fragmentation, its incompleteness, its calling on us to keep searching and perhaps never finding and always moving. So I think you're doing something really wonderful when it comes to this body that we call the archive through our own kind of kinetic possibilities. Thank you.
In this tension or ambiguity between the flaneur and the zombie, and beyond the resistance, the strong resistance that the archive as such does to virtual reality in a way, because you are pulling things in a very different direction than what they are normally used to when we navigate in virtual reality. But I wonder if, when I was looking at this, it seemed to me that it was like a fable of the return effect that virtual space does over public space. In the sense that obviously this is a gallery, it's a public space where people go, it has a certain topology. And one wonders if these people are not already trained not to bump into each other. Because that's the way we inhabit virtual space, by not bumping into each other. So I was wondering if this was a training previous or enabled by the experience you created there. And if it's previous, it seems to me that it's a bit of a fable of this idea that people are immersed in their own way of navigating, in this case, an archive project, but automatically they know they shouldn't, they're not going to bump into each other because automatically they know to escape it. But I wonder, I mean, you said that there was a kind of peeping onto others, or I mean, the idea that they were like, there was some kind of, they were looking at each other. I wonder how much they're really looking at each other, if they're not just looking enough not to bump. And in that sense, if it seems to me that also if there is a community, there's obviously a community there in that where we are looking now. But what one is, what kind of community? Isn't it a community where the solidarity is the pleasure of being each away somewhere? I mean, there is a community, but it seems that they all are having pleasure there. But that pleasure seems to be by the fact that they are away from the physical space they are inhabiting together. And that looks to me very much as a fable, as I said, as a return effect of what virtual space does to public space. Not in a dystopic way. When you say they are away in a different space, that's utopia. But just as a constatation, I mean, like something you're seeing, not judging for the time being. Because I think the experience is amazing, but also beyond the exhibition itself that I saw, and it's really, I congratulate you for that.
Siraj, yeah, obviously you were talking about some historical coming into being of this archival situation belonging to two institutions that I'm not, of course, aware of. You know, what is the full the full plot underneath that. So when you say that, well, first I only have to thank, I mean, that you think that this project is expandable. And in terms of, I really liked what you said about the project being able to help. Actually, that was the best thing. Not to solve a problem, but to help maybe people go beyond the discussion of presupposed fixed places for facts and fabulations. Because you said the crisis is exactly when you try to draw this line and try to say, no, we must protect the dignity of the facts, the dignity of the facts, because the facts of apartheid history, I know they're very, very serious, and they are taken for serious. And sometimes, this is me as a foreigner saying, in this country, when a couple of times, I felt that the respect for the history of apartheid was almost a factor of freezing the history, of freezing that material that seems to be untouchable, and that seems to be like something that is so serious that nobody can actually, get into that without getting into terrible conflicts. So I think, and I was half aware of that my position as a foreigner allowed me to have this naivety and propose, these things about, let's put these newspaper clippings here, let's paint them green, let's invite these students. So there's a degree of irresponsibility that maybe only a foreigner could afford into this history. And maybe this alien factor of this project could actually, if it is not seen as a threat to truth, because it actually defends truth. It's not against, it's not relativizing truth. It's actually trying to think, how is it that we can keep truth a value, but not in terms of immobility. It comes back to my theme. We have to put mobility into truth. I am now talking allegorically because I did literally. The movement of people in the exhibition meets allegory of the symbolic of this movement between facts and fabulations. But I do think that maybe people can understand that a little bit of flexibility and feel a bit less threatened that the destruction of the patrimony of the archive, if you are a bit less afraid of that, that can, put the debate a step further. And I just feel honored that you think that this exhibition can do something in that sense. I don't know. But there's something interesting when you say about the unfolding of the project. There is Tapelo Tele here. from the Stellenbosch University, who's been talking to me about something that it's already been called the methodology of facts and fabulations, which I never intended. But it is interesting that this thing about showing an image, actually, I don't think this is original. I seem to have remembered seeing this thing about put an image, ask people to fabulate. But what is maybe original is just this specific situation in time and space here at the CHR, here at this moment, here in 2026. Maybe this arrangement of students, augmented reality, a gallery, sound fabulations, maybe that is a kind of something that happened here. So it's like not very replicable, but it can be expandable in the sense that the idea of understanding that if you give to somebody the opportunity to fabulate into something that this person is ignorant of, that person need not to be discarded for this ignorance, but actually be welcomed from this other vision to actually bring some help and some more complexity, and to help us see what is naturalized in our discourse from a different perspective. So this is maybe what we are talking, Tapelo and me, in like an unfolding of this, which has nothing to do with the archive. It's just this mechanics, this kind of method of engaging people into talking about something and then revealing, but not thinking in the fabulations as mistakes. That is maybe the main thing here. Candice, thanks again for so many contributions. You were saying, are you saying that the archive is a body and there's something being done with this body? Yes, I already spoke about the painting things green and the bringing a bit down the authority of the archive that can, again, in coming back to Siraj's point, become threatening, because actually this is just to make a little bit of a deambulation myself. We are in a very problematic time in terms of our relationship with institutions, because not long ago we used to think we had to put all institutions down. The university, the archive, everything is like instruments of power. And then all of a sudden, with the threat of the authoritarian regimes to destroy these very institutions, and my school, for instance, in Brazil is one example, we are forced to defend something that we were challenging, pushing to come to a new existence. And now we are in this in-between moment that we have to also to defend the archive, defend the university, and sometimes we have to defend truth, which is something maybe very obsolete to do. But this is my point with my debates with Stigler, is like non-accepting certain terms doesn't mean I don't think they are true. It just means that to accept them means an acceleration towards decrepitude of institutions, that actually if we try to resist using old terms, older concepts, maybe it's a way of postponing this calamity. So I don't know if you were, this is just a parenthesis. I love what you said about the texture and the image bringing us into the texture. Because a texture is an image, right? So it's like it's a way of imagining text as an interwoven fabric that also can be so many things you can do with a fabric. I'm not going there. Anyway, yeah, I love what you said. Andres, thank you so much for thinking with me about this situation, which actually, as I said, I only saw after Candice asked me a question and after I saw this. And I said myself that maybe these people are already trained to this. So there's not, in principle, there's nothing new about that. They're just how they move. What I think is maybe a little bit different and special is that because this is done not in the subway, in the street, in a shopping mall, but in a gallery space, which has its own history, institutional, carries its own institutional protocols of movement, of being, displaying your own body. Maybe this can bring a glimpse of awareness of this surreal situation, which actually, to me, what stresses the most is this idea of peaceful conviviality, not excluding the others, but admitting the others laterally. You said, oh, maybe they're not even paying attention. Yes, I know, it's laterally. I just thought that maybe, I don't know, because it's very new for me, but I was thought of maybe the laterality of the social is something that we can think about instead of the delivery of a ready-made image of oneself immediately consumable. So the lateral, pushing people to the margins, might be a way of accepting them back into a social conviviality. So this is more like what I was, intuitively thinking.
When you think of the way that toddlers, before they become socialized, function in social space, in total awareness of others' presence, but in total self-absorption in themselves and the device or the play object that they're engaged with. And I was just thinking of that kind of metaphor of parallel play as a kind of, just maybe one way of describing what goes on in that interface between total absorption, but also lateral consciousness. That is a new form of sociability that you're alerting us to, but which may go back to a kind of infantile self-knowledge.
No, I'd like to ask, what is a parallel play? I'm sorry. I don't know.
Yeah, in child psychology, parallel play is the play that children do before they become socialized and interactive. So you can have toddlers in a nursery, each very absorbed with their own toy. They're aware that others are in the space, so they're not alone, but they're totally absorbed in the object of their own attention. Okay. And it's a it's a sort of psychological phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah, but Nietzsche would say there's always that moment when I get the toy of the neighbor.
Okay, I was also reminded of the panel yesterday afternoon with our colleagues from Ukwanda who were talking about the importance of, in fact, the art of making the right joint so that movement is enabled. And it seems that we have been seeing the art of your joint work here also producing something that we will continue to think with. I'm aware that we've probably run out of time and we should move to our dinner and drinks outside where we can continue to be convivial. But I would just like to thank Marcos for his brilliant lecture and exhibition.